What's up, guys? Just another of the same, just like the previous video at 1080p. I also figured I'd do one at 1440p because looking at the benchmarks online, it doesn't seem accurate to the RX 5700 performance. It seems a bit low on the benchmark sites based on 1-minute runs. So I'm just going to do the first level again on Nightmare, and I'll just show you the settings here. 1620 base boost frequency for the RX 5700, so that's pretty much stock. Just got my fan profile like normal to keep the temps down, but that does not affect the boost. Okay, the boost is set on a reference fixed frequency, not left on auto. 20.3.1 drivers. The game settings, so you can see the drivers here. I've got 6700K at 4.5 gigahertz, which is just an old test bench really. It's weak compared to the 9900K, so there should be no issues with my CPU inflating, CPU inflating results. And then I've got the, global graphics. I've got all this stuff turned off. And under graphics, I've got the texture filtering on default of standard. Okay, so now I'll go back into the game. And you can see the settings here. 1440p off, ultra preset, and I've got my sharpening at 75 and fill grain 0. The default is like 25 for film grain, and sharpening is a bit lower. But if adjusting these settings boosts FPS by any considerable amount, it would be pretty big news. Like, I've always thought of these as just slight. Like, normally if you crank this up, it should actually drop the FPS, not improve it. And the resolution scaling is off. Okay, and just forgive me, my kid's screaming in the background and ruining the video. So this is the start of the first level. I'm going to actually skip through the cutscenes this time. I'm just going to start the benchmark from the moment I start playing, and I'm going to stop the benchmark between scenes. So as I get, I'll stop it at the cutscene for the first Hell Priest, and then I'll start it again for after the first Hell Priest, and then I'll stop it at the checkpoint where Hardware and Box also did their benchmark, just so that we have a snippet to compare to what they were getting at 1440p. And other sites, but yeah, I'm testing at Ultra, so Hardware and Box are the only guys testing at Ultra that have a more direct comparison I can use. So anyway, starting now. So you can see the FPS looks to be holding around. It's going up obviously when I'm not fighting, but when I'm actually in combat or doing something intensive, we'll try to just pay attention to it and see if the FPS is dropping as low as. I mean, this is a weird thing. If an intensive scene is when the FPS drops, that should be your 1% low range or your minimum range, not the average. Okay. So, unless you're doing an average of the lowest FPS, which doesn't make sense from an averaging standpoint, the gameplay like this should be where the average is coming from. So you can see it's dropping to the 90s there for that bit. But this is not where Hardware and Box tested. This is a really intensive fight scene indoors. But see, some of this combat, it's holding 130 FPS, 111, 130. But there is a lot of stuff going on. This is intensive. This is what I would expect for the 1% to show a lower number. But at the same time, when you're playing Doom, you do move around a lot. You have to kite the monsters and be able to aim at them from a distance or at close range. So if the FPS is going up and down, that's what the average is supposed to represent. Not just when the FPS happens to drop. It's an average of all of it put together, right? That sounds fair? So if my FPS drops to 90, but then it's running at 130 for half the combat, or 120, then that doesn't mean the average is 90. It means the average is somewhere in between, right? And I end the benchmark there. And this is where Hardware and Box tested. I'm just gonna sorry, it's hard to alt tab with window scaling and stuff. Radeon ReLive. So that was the first section. I was averaging 126 and the low was 88. So the low was pretty bad, but I am running on a weaker test bench. You got to like give some leeway, but the GPU's relative performance, like, or realistic performance, was 126 FPS average for that first scene. Okay. And when I do this next scene, you should see an extra benchmark pop up under there. So you know I'm not like, I haven't pre-benchmarked this. I'll keep this file explorer window open too. Okay, so F7 and start walking.
There are 2 Hell Priests remaining.
Kind of annoying that I'm in this screen though. That's boosting the FPS. I'm actually going to redo this part now because that's annoying. That was giving me like 200 FPS, which throws the result off. I'm going to reload that checkpoint. It should let me keep the gun. Okay, so I'm restarting the benchmark now.
The first Hell Priest has been terminated. The demonic consumption of Earth has been reduced by 36.8%. There are 2 Hell Priests remaining.
Okay, so Steve and Hardware Unbox said that AMD drop FPS when you do intensive stuff. So when I shoot this, it dropped to 80. Yeah, that's fair. That one didn't drop at all. That we could see on screen. But here it's up at 120, 100, 111. $90. And I think that's it for this section. The next checkpoint's over that hill, so I've stopped the benchmark already. And we're gonna take a look. So we... Oh, wait a second. It didn't. Why is it not doing it? I didn't do anything different. Wait a second. I'll save. I press F7 now. I press F8. F7. I got like a key stuck somewhere. Sorry, just checking. I don't know why it's doing this. F8. F7. F8. There we go. What the heck? It's like it's delayed. Or there was a stuck key. Okay, sorry about that. I shall do it again. F7. Please be recording.
The demonic consumption of Earth has been reduced by 36.8%. There are 2 Hell Priests remaining.
So blowing up that barrel over there doesn't seem to drop FPS at all. It's the closer one that might be doing something. Get some ammo. Oh crap, I fell down. Okay, that's enough. Wait, one more. And F8. F8, F8, F8. Hoping that captured properly. There we go. So average 107, low 81 for that intensive scene. And TechSpot's result for that scene at 1440p was 83 and 102. So still a bit lower. Maybe I played through it a bit too fast. It was 46 seconds, not a minute. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know why the results just seem to be lower for the competitive. Like for example, the competitor that NVIDIA would want to beat the 5700 is probably the 2060 Super. If this was up at 107, it makes that gap just that little bit smaller. And I'm not accusing them of having some sort of NVIDIA bias towards the respective competitive GPUs, like even though the XT's competitor is the Super. But if you look at the XT, it's at 117, 10 FPS better than the 5700. It kind of seems a bit odd. They did mention that maybe NVIDIA has tweaked their game to perform better in the early stages, because that's where reviewers are going to benchmark. So, for example, this next scene, let's just pretend that there's some bias towards how, maybe NVIDIA optimized their drivers for this specific area after the first Hell Priest. Okay, I'm not saying they went around and told reviewers to use this area, but let's just pretend that that area is not good for benchmarking AMD. This area up ahead is, if I load, should let me load there. This area up ahead is intensive. It's all fighting down there. Okay? So as soon as I jump down, I'm going to hit F7 and do another benchmark of a fighting scene. So here we go. 7. From the start of the combat, I've already hit F7. And I died. Sorry, fail. I'll load that again. Wait, I'll hit F8, cancel. I kind of need to make sure this is empty now. So this is just for the sake of getting accurate gameplay data. Okay, so I'm gonna hit F7. I'm gonna kill this thing first and get some ammo. If I can grab it. Now I'm gonna hit F7 and jump down and fight. If I can find this monster. Oh my god, it's actually a hard scene. Okay, F8. You're gonna have to ignore the short ones. It'll be a longer benchmark run, they have timers on it. So F7. Let's kill this guy this way. Oh my god. This is why they test on lower difficulty. Jeez. Get the ammo. Okay, from when I jump down, I'm gonna hit F7 as soon as I start fighting, and I need it on grenade mode to actually fight that thing. Okay, so F7. Okay, so I'm sure you guys can agree that this is some intensive combat, right? If I can get through this scene without dying. Okay, so this is just one scene after where hardware unbox we're testing. When I've killed all the monsters, I'll blow this up too, and I'll end the benchmark to avoid running at scenes like this where nothing's happening. Okay, so wait, that was open. It should still be there. So the longer one was a 56.7. That was it. That was the run from when I jumped down. Average 122. See these shorter runs? It shows higher. It's because I died so quick, but that was just during a really short section of combat. But we're looking at this one here, this last one that ended at 1852, and the time is 53. So yeah. So 122 was the average frame rate for that scene, and that was intensive combat, and that puts it at 1440p on a non-XT model. That puts my GPU above the XT in VII and approaching the 1080 Ti, and this is the non-XT model, guys. So it's just really weird. The section that they're benchmarking seems to favor NVIDIA a lot, unless these GPUs will all perform much higher in the same section, which you wouldn't know until they tested there. And I'm sure if I benchmark for the whole first level, it's gonna be an even more consistent average rather than 111 from that one scene where you're up high on the mount cliff bit. That cliff seems to drop FPS on AMD. So yeah, I don't know. Like, make of it what you will. This is just more to show people that are also wondering how's the 1440p performance. It doesn't seem to average down at 100. It's actually a little bit higher, closer to the XT level that's being shown here. Which means their XT level will probably average a bit higher when you're actually playing through other sections of the game, not just that 1 minute run with the broken wall and the cliff. So for the sake of this video, I'll press F7 now and do a bit more combat and try to get to another intensive scene. But this all counts as gameplay, so you know, you get an average, and yes, not all of it is fighting, but it's gameplay, and it's not just not necessarily cherry picked, but it's not a specific part of gameplay. It's just through the first level, so not a specific part of the first level. And you can see here, these parts could also be considered intensive. Fighting in close combat could be considered intensive, and I'm getting like the FPS drops it's going to are more like the averages that are being shown on that website. So if I shoot from here, look, the FPS is at 120. If I use some long range combat, okay? And then if I go closer, just what's the FPS? 111, 107, 97, 80, but now it's at 100. Oh, I don't want that thing to fight me. 90. But you do have to keep in mind they're showing the 1% low that represents the FPS drops. You know, the low FPS that it's at for a good portion of the time. Oh, I can chainsaw them? That's awesome. But the main thing to take into account is that when you're looking at an average, it's supposed to be a combination of highs and lows. You know, it's not supposed to just be an average of the lowest point that the GPU drops to, because then what's the point of having a 1% low to look at if you're already focusing on the specific areas that are not optimized for that GPU. I mean, the only other way I can think of it is that if they only benchmark combat and then they had a separate benchmark for looking at scenery, that would be fair, because then you'd have like 90 FPS combat. That would be your combat FPS, and then scenery and looking at like the background FPS would be like 112, or depending on where you are. But that gets too technical, you know. Then you're looking at, you've also got to think about indoor FPS. What's my indoor FPS? It's actually 140, 130. And if I blow up this barrel indoors, as they said that blowing up barrels is intensive, it drops to 100. But what does that make the average? It gets messy when you try to overthink it. But I'm running this benchmark just for normal gameplay purposes, instead of having a 1 minute time frame to really gauge the performance of the GPU. It's like a 10-minute time frame. So your 1% lows will still be accurate in the sense of the lows, but your average is going to be stretched out across a better period of time, like a more relevant. I was meant to break a wall up there. A more relevant period of time.
Take a moment to look around you.
Now I'm going to stop the benchmark here because I am just wandering around. It's around 112 for this indoor reflective area, but I was recording for most of that, searching. And I'll start it at the next combat scene and stop it when the combat stops, because then we get a rough idea of the gameplay. Like if they want to say that, if people want to say that it's intensive, how they're focusing on the intensive parts of the game, so intensive should be combat more logically, because that's where it matters, right? If an intensive background like this is and drops FPS, it's still not relative to the gameplay because you're not fighting. You're not doing anything that requires high frame rate and low input latency. It's only when you're really fighting monsters. So we look down here, and then I'll start it from this section. F7. And again, I'm not trying to be biased either. If the FPS drops, it drops. I just think that the average is more relevant when it's including all this type of gameplay. And the 1% low already covers the FPS drop for intensive scenes. But the average is the gameplay. It's So there's still combat. There hasn't been much non-combat scene. That's why I didn't stop the benchmark. I want to just try to transition it between. Oh, I died. Lame. It's okay. There was only a small pause. I want to try to transition between two combat scenes to like. People can agree that this should be an intensive scene. It doesn't just have to be outdoors. It's combat. And you have to be kind of fast to avoid...
The cleansing of Earth is a necessary step.
Ah! Okay, wait, I'm gonna restart the benchmark for this part. Because I died and the pause is enough to annoy me. Okay, so F7. So this is Ultra 1440p, just keep that in mind. Wait for this creature to come out. I hate it. I hate this thing. Ah! Okay, wait, I'm gonna load it back and I'm gonna drop the difficulty just so that I can benchmark this properly. F8. Too young to die. F7. There we go. There's still lots of stuff happening. This is pretty intensive, I'd say, even though it's in a corridor. And that was it. So F8. Maybe a second I stared at a 120 FPS wall, but it shouldn't matter for a moment. And if I go here, and we look at that last bit, which ended 3:15. Wait. I mean 1903, which is 7:03. Okay, that was 52 seconds, and the average was 115. Pretty intensive gameplay, and then 82. So still a bit low on the 1440p comparison. So this, all this is just another section to do a benchmark in. That was pretty intensive. Like, I would call it intensive. But my average is still a good, like, that's more than 10 FPS. That's statistically noticeable. That would put it up with the 2070 Super, 2060 Super, and the 2070. So, you know, it does make me wonder why that specific area is showing such low AMD performance, or why their cards are underperforming in the first place. See, this is within 2 FPS of the XT, but it is a different area. It's not as intensive an area, but if that specific area does have a low FPS AMD issue, the only way to know would be a test showing the rest of the level. But it does seem that testing in for the longer time period benchmarks I did, see how even with the time doubled, the average is very similar. And this was 56 seconds, average is 122. This was too short to be really relevant. And this one was too short to be relevant. And this one was too short. But it's still kind of odd, because normally the longer time period you get, the longer you benchmark, the more accurate the average is going to be for the gameplay. Unless you're literally walking through a hall with no monsters, the longer you run a benchmark, the more the average should line up. And I had a 229 second run here, the average was 115. 106 second run, 115. 52 second run in that intensive hallway with the spider and stuff, 115. Okay? This was where I was jumping down from the top before this checkpoint, I think. Or maybe I just died really quick around the corner. So this was a bit of a erratic, like, I wouldn't actually call it, like, that doesn't mean that the average is 135, even if it was 40 seconds. But I'm seeing some consistency in the level of performance. Okay? And it just seems really odd that the section that they're running is showing weaker performance. So anyway, I guess the other way to check, like, see, this is another fight room. It's kind of intensive. There's lots of stuff going on. Spiders spawn down there. I'll start another benchmark here. And you can see I'm in combat. Like, I'm not just doing passive benchmarking where I'm not trying to fight or do anything that has exploding stuff in my face. I'm literally trying to play the game in a way that represents the gameplay anyone else would experience, and the performance should be relative to that, the benchmark. So I'm gonna clear this room. There's 2 big spider fights that should be down here somewhere if I can find them. It's probably more intensive than the scene that Hardware Unboxed were testing at, because that scene has just a few monsters. The biggest thing in that is 2 exploding barrels, but I've already checked, and the closer barrel does a little bit of an FPS drop, but that is not the average. It's an FPS drop. It doesn't represent combat for the whole section. Yeah, here's the spider. But I need ammo. From this guy. So that was a lot of explosions in my face, right? Oh, so close. I was at 8 HP. Now another spider comes. Where'd it go? Sorry, I'm also trying not to die even though it's on a low difficulty. Jeez. And you can see the FPS drop happening. It's just that is not the minimum. That is not the average FPS. It's not. Like, you can't just look at FPS drop and say, well, it dropped to 100, so that's the average. When something intensive happens. Okay, so that's the end of that scene, and F8, because there's nothing out here.
The
and we'll take another look because that ended at 709 or just around that. See, 1909, and average is still lining up even with different timing intervals for the last few runs. I don't know what I did here, it was even higher, but can you see the consistency? This is all taken on the first level at different sections of the first level during combat, where I tried to specifically focus on the intensive combat, and I was throwing grenades, blowing stuff up, stuff was exploding in my face multiple times. It's still averaging 114, which puts it within a few FPS of the XT. So that tells me the XT is underperforming here, or the section they've chosen is biased towards NVIDIA. Okay, so I'm not saying they're purposely, like, NVIDIA paid them to do it or something like that, they're shilling. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that they've coincidentally just chosen an area that favors NVIDIA, and if they benchmark at other sections, maybe the AMD performance would be stronger. Because I'm not getting 102 FPS in all of these tests, and I'm running the same Ultra 1440p. I wouldn't even make a big deal out of this normally if it was a 3 or 4 FPS difference, margin of error type of stuff, but this is over 10 FPS, which is one GPU to the next. If you feel me, like, that is basically favoring NVIDIA to post benchmarks like this when the stock performance at 1620 megahertz. I can actually go to metrics, which might have shown. It's not really useful, is it? 1600 megahertz, like, it's confusing to say the least, and it's misleading in a way to have benchmarks come up like this, because these aren't Doom first checkpoint benchmarks. These are Doom Eternal GPU performance benchmarks. Okay, and I've got an RX 5700, and I'm getting like 12 FPS higher or more across multiple sections of the first level. I just didn't focus on that one specific spot, but even when I did, the FPS was a little bit better. And it doesn't make sense. The XT is supposed to be a fair bit stronger than the 5700 at stock. Unless their XT is overheated, something's come loose. Driver issue, 20.3.1 drivers are actually hurting performance somehow, or that scene is optimized and NVIDIA have boosted their performance in the first checkpoint, but then after that, maybe it levels out and their performance doesn't improve that much while AMD's goes up. So, really, really strange. And the fact that I'm doing this live while recording with ReLive, which has a tiny performance hit of a few FPS, which I'm sure most people can agree with. I'm recording with ReLive right now at 50 Mbps, and yeah, I'm still getting over 10 FPS higher on average with different sections of the first level. So I've got the benchmark off right now. I'm gonna do another spot. I'll find another intensive combat area. It's not indoors, an outdoor one. Although the last one was pretty good. Go away, go away. I don't have ammo. Oh no, wait, I've got my grenade gun. That didn't work. Okay, up here, there's a outdoor open section where, similar thing, you gotta clear the whole room to unlock the next section. So from when I jump through, I'm gonna hit F7 and record the whole combat scene and benchmark the whole scene. So F7. you'll see a lot of stuff going on because there's a lot of monsters in this area. So yeah, either something's off with that section, a 1 minute benchmark in that section, or I've got a golden 5700 that performs like an XT at base frequency, which makes no sense on a weaker test bench. Like, you can see the explosions, right? Like, you can see that I'm not trying to look at high FPS scenery, right? It's not me being crazy, thinking that the benchmark methodology or some opinions on what counts as an intensive scene seem a bit like not the best excuse to say that the performance is actually how it is in those benchmarks. I think that the representation is inaccurate of the performance because I'm testing different scenes here and the benchmark's off. But see that where I stopped the benchmark, that cutscene was 120 FPS showing the door opening. When I went to walk, kill that last monster, it was at 130. So I actually stopped the benchmark early to avoid this less intensive, like there's no more monsters left kind of recording. So I'm not even recording big parts where I'm just walking through a section. At the start of after the first Hell Priest, that there's actually a good push where you're just walking and looking at scenery. So if a particular bit of scenery was not optimized for AMD for some reason, the drivers, and it drops their FPS, that's not relevant either. It should just be combat that's being recorded. But they don't actually show their benchmark tool live. They just put it, because they're doing so many GPUs. But anyway, I recorded that fight scene, and it ended around 17:16. I'm going to close and reopen the window. So yeah, 17:15. And I was getting 110 FPS. That was a pretty intensive kind of semi-open doors fight area, and it's still pretty close to this. It's definitely higher than this, than the 5700 here. So F7, another outdoor fight area. I'll try to blow up more grenades, because yeah, they did say that AMD performance goes down when you blow up barrels, and I'm guessing grenades are similar to a blowing barrel, an exploding barrel. I don't have that many exploding barrels to test here though. And I'll try to get straight into another combat scene with minimal walking, which is actually unfair, you know, because the scene they benchmark at did not have this much fighting in it. Nowhere near, actually. It was kind of empty compared to this. I don't have ammo left though, that's a problem. Yeah, they didn't even have a spider fight in their scene. So F8 to end it. There was actually some more low FPS combat up here, but I ended it after killing all those monsters. And 718, roughly 718, 150. How can that coincidentally? How can I be getting so many 110, 115 FPS results from different sections of the first level if the one section they benchmarked at gets 102 FPS? So that means that section's broken, or there's an issue, or there's a NVIDIA optimization favoring thing. So I'm not trying to make Steve and all that pull down their results and do it all over again. I think there's still some relevance there for the NVIDIA cards, but the AMD results are gimped. Just based off this. This is multiple runs at different sections. For some for longer time periods, which should not be syncing up, and they are, yet they are. Like, yeah, the minimums are changing a little bit, But the averages, how can they just line up so clearly? How can it, like, you seeing this? How can it average 115 unless the benchmark tool is not broken because it's doing its job with the 1% lows. It's just the average is what the average is. You know, it's an average of all the drops and all the highs. It's an average of all this. The minimum, the max, the 1%, the 0.1%. And you can even see the 1% lows are all very close. They're 83, 83, 84, 82, 80, 84, except for this first one that was a little bit higher than all the others. But this is different sections of the game, so I would expect some variance there. But this is crazy. I'm doing these live. There's no which way about it that I could be altering these results, taking it from the same folder. So if I load checkpoint, this is just to show you that I can't be gimping stuff. So this is that same area that I just cleared. Okay? What if I go into settings and I change it to Ultra Nightmare? Surely if the tool is broken, it'll show the exact same result. Ultra Nightmare is a little bit harder to run. It is not exactly the same, even though they try to say that there's only a small difference. It's harder to run. 2560 by 1440. Okay, and I'm going to start benchmarking from when I could start now really because it's already at 100 FPS. F7, and I'm going to jump down to 5. And yeah, you just watch the FPS and we'll see if the result is different. Because then there's something could be off with the benchmark tool. If the benchmark tool is just showing 115 all the time, which I doubt because I used the same exact benchmark tool for all my other benchmarks, especially when I did their own the whole first level at 1080p. Yeah, if the benchmark tool is just likes to set it to 115, then we'll see what happens here on Ultra Nightmare at 1440p. But I do need more ammo, dude. Go. So see all this explosions going on? This is intensive. No one can argue with that. It's outdoors, there's shit going on in the background. The FPS is lower clearly at some points when I was stabbing the thing in the eye. And it's actually more, there's a lot more minions here than in that one scene that they tested before at the first checkpoint. So yeah, I'll stop the benchmark there. F8. And let's take a look. The time is 7:22. So here, 7:22. I can't make this up. 109 FPS at Ultra Nightmare. So definitely it dropped. Okay, the numbers changed. The minimum went down by, well, the minimum was actually pretty low on some of these too. But the minimum went down for this scene, for this particular scene. These are the two to compare. This one was even a bit longer, so it should have been more consistent. Like, you give a longer time frame, you're going to get more consistency, provided you're not walking around in an empty area with no monsters. But I was fighting for the majority of that. Maximum is a little bit higher, interestingly. Maybe the way the drivers loads with the load of the game. And the 1%, and these are more CPU based in my opinion, but these were also very close within margin of error. But the average did go down with Ultra Nightmare. So the only other thing I could do to try to give some consistency, because I don't want people arguing that if I can load back there, yep, is they did 3 runs of each area. I'm not going to do 3 runs because I think I've already more than proved my point. But I'm going to set it back to Ultra, just like the first time, and I'm going to start recording from when I jump down. Slightly fight a bit, and F7. So this is, obviously I can't kill the monsters in the same way, but I can cause a lot of explosions. I can try to artificially create intensive scenes by blowing stuff up right in front of me. And then the only argument that someone could give for why my FPS would be over 10 FPS higher than another benchmark run is those barrels in the first checkpoint are special barrels that drop FPS and drop the average FPS when you shoot them, and lower the entire run's FPS down to 100. So yeah, that was it. I think there's still 2 more up there, but I don't want to drag it out. F8, because they were hiding back there. I didn't want to like just keep recording because the FPS maybe it leveled out a bit higher, but it seems pretty consistent. Like it seems to be hovering around the same range for this whole run. So if we go out of this, so the last one before was at 1922, closing it, and then we should have finished around 25 or 24. Yeah, 25. So 112. So it is changing, and that's the variance between runs, right? But every single time I'm not getting under 110. 110 was the lowest, and these are even longer than the 1 minute that hardware was given it. So yeah, make of this what you will. This is the first level. This is already the end of the first level. If I go through that gate up there, it finishes the level. So I've basically checked all the areas of this game, of the first level. And the results speak for themselves, guys. There's something wrong with the 1 minute after the first Hell Priest to the next checkpoint where you jump down. From there onwards, the performance is much higher in general for the whole level. So this is a much bigger sample size than 1 minute at the first checkpoint. So it's possible that all of these GPUs will improve performance from that same point, but it's also possible that NVIDIA optimized their drivers for the first section of the game because that's where people are going to check, not necessarily play through the whole level. But it does make AMD look bad. And when I went through that scene, it didn't seem so low to me. It was higher. So yeah, and yeah, blowing up barrels and throwing grenades and doing intensive, intensive gameplay does not seem to be a good alibi for why. And this one was an ultra nightmare. Does not seem to be a good alibi for why the FPS would be lower. Like, see, it's worth noting that in less demanding areas, AMD performs better relative to NVIDIA, but if you don't blow the barrels up and don't focus on more demanding scenes, but their focus is on demanding areas of the game, but they only focused on one area of the first level. With 2 barrels you can blow up. But I blew up those barrels. The left one causes a little bit of FPS drop, but it's not going to drop the average. Okay, this is what I want to stress, is that we were just testing and I blew up a ton of grenades, which is very similar to a barrel blowing up. And I blew up the right barrel. You can rewatch this video, pause it at the same section where I went over, because they have that, they've got it on their video, the portion of the game that they tested. After the first Hell Priest, you break through the wall and there's 2 barrels. Okay, you can replay this video at a slow speed and check if those minor FPS drops are indicative of the averages that these guys are showing you. Because all the FPS drop should do is drop the 1% minimums down a little bit, or drop the average down a little bit, not make the average go from 115 to 102. That to me is like an overheated graphics card, or something's wrong, or something is just off there. Because I don't even have an XT and I'm getting close to XT performance at base frequency. Okay, and the base frequency is a fair bit higher and it's got more compute cores. It makes me think that this should actually be getting around 130 if it was tested throughout the rest of the level, or at least in the 120s. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys, and yeah, this was Ultra 1440p and one test of Nightmare. So hope you enjoyed that, and it gives you something to actually go by rather than just benchmark websites. If we look at another website at 1440p, because I haven't thoroughly looked at these, but if we look at 1440p Ultra Nightmare, their RX 5700 result was still higher, 107. Okay, I don't know where they tested at, probably for a short time period because they did do a lot of GPUs as well, but 107 and 85 for the RX 5700 at Ultra Nightmare, and that's within 2 FPS of my result. Okay, so 1% low was 85, my 1% low at Nightmare was 84. Okay, you can't like just make stuff up and just have, like, I can't do a video live and just have it happen to line up with this review site, and then this review site is like way off. 82. Well, the minimum's actually fine. The minimum, well, it's still a bit low for normal Ultra because this one was Ultra Nightmare, but then yeah, my average and minimum are in the mid to high 80s. Or this one was a bit low. 1% lows, I mean. 1% lows were mid 80s to the low 79. So that's actually close to what they posted within 5 FPS. But yeah, the averages are just, it's really low. And then if we go to who else was it? Tech Power Up. Comparing the Ultra Nightmare 1440p settings that they, because all the other sites seem to test it at those settings. Ultra Nightmare, their 5700 had 116 FPS. So I was at 109. Theirs was even better than mine for wherever they were testing at. But to me, at least, if I go through the whole first level and did it the same way for Ultra Nightmare, maybe I would get a lot more. I would definitely be getting better than this. Like, it doesn't make sense. They should all average out to some consistency, like 116 Ultra Nightmare, 107. I mean, there's still a bit of a gap there. I don't know what they did differently. Test bench 900K at 5 gigahertz. Could be driver version. No, 20.3.1 is the same. So that could be down to the area they tested in. Maybe these guys also tested in, but it is at a higher preset. Maybe they also tested at the first checkpoint, so it's a bit lower on the 5700 8 gig reference model. But yeah, it's just strange. So yeah, rewatch this video, guys. Pause it wherever you want. Find the intensive scenes. Try to take a look, and at least you saw these live benchmarks using MSI Afterburner that are showing a good 10 FPS higher on average, if not more, throughout the whole first level. So yeah, thanks for watching, and if you like this, like and subscribe, and appreciate all the support. See you.